Morning, folks. So nice to finally be here. It's been a while. We've been wanting to come see you folks for a few years now, but as you know, the elephant in the room being COVID is is what kept us apart. Irma, thank you for reaching out to us and inviting us. Really appreciate that. We've been kind of waiting for the right time. And I thought, well, once COVID's over, and dare I say it, I'm not going to say it. It is, I think we're thawing, would you say? We're finally starting to kind of come out of it a little bit. So I appreciate that some of the churches that have been with us and supporting us over the years aren't quite ready or at full capacity or at the numbers they were before the pandemic, as people just slowly start getting used to getting back to the congregation. But yeah, it's nice to finally be here. We've been back 3 years now, if you can imagine. I think we're almost 3 years, going on 3 years that we've been back. And well, we came back during that pandemic. That was quite a show. Getting to the airports, I remember getting into Istanbul and walking up to the departure boards trying to see where our flight gate was, and all I could see from a distance was canceled, and then Toronto on time, and then canceled. So it was really, we got in under the wire to make it back to Canada, and we're really happy we did, because we were coming back because of Charlie's health. So we had a real scare with her health. We spent a lot of time, as soon as we got back to Canada, spent a lot of time in the hospital. And we're really appreciative of our healthcare system, despite the COVID restrictions and the real stress the whole system was under coming from Africa to here. I was just like, well, thank God for this medical system, you know. So it's perspective. Whichever way you look at it, for us it was a huge blessing, and we were able to get Charlie implanted with a vagus nerve stimulator. I don't know if you've heard of that before. So Charlie was suffering severe seizures, epileptic seizures, 12 to 14 a day, and that really gave us a fright, and that's why we came back to Canada and we were able to get an implant done. So like a pacemaker for the brain. So they implant it in the chest. Am I rabbit holing here? They implant it in the chest, they wire it to your heart, and they wire it to your vagus nerve in the back of your brain, and it senses seizures coming on, and it sends an electric pulse into the brain to counteract the seizure. It doesn't stop it, but it dampens the seriousness, and with that, the recovery time is much less. So she's kind of back to herself. She still has 10 or 12 a day, but they're, you know, it might only last 5 minutes, and then she takes 5 minutes to kind of come around, and then she's good to go and gets on with her day, whereas she used to have to sleep that off for an hour or two, and you know, do that 10 or 12 times a day. She was sleeping 20 hours a day. So that was, anyway, so we're thankful we came back when we did. And we know that God had a plan for that right from the start. And of course, when you're right in the thick of it, you don't always see it. But no, we're in the right place at the right time, and that's His provision. Though I have to say, we were very saddened to hear about the passing of Pastor David. That was actually quite a shocker. I apologize for my reaction on the phone there when she relayed the news to me, and it just goes to show how COVID kind of cut off some of the communication lines too, right? Being able to share, and that kind of information sharing that happens when you're out in the community doesn't happen. So it was kind of a little bit of a bubble that we were living in, cut off from everything. But yeah, my deepest condolences. I know Pastor David was a huge fan of MAF. And Irma, I'm sure you were too. You guys have very personal ties to MAF and the years of missionary service, and how MAF helped you guys, especially in the time of crisis with your children. So I know there was a deep connection to MAF, and which led Pastor David to be one of the first to invite us when we were brand new missionaries. You know, just getting out there, starting to raise support and find our prayer warriors, and just get the community behind us to go serve overseas. He was one of the first ones to invite us to this church to be able to talk about MAF and the work that they're doing around the world. So that struck a chord with us. Because of that, we could just sense that heart for it. He was just a huge supporter of MAF in all ways. So we've now been with Mission Aviation Fellowship for 10 years. Oh, next slide, please. There. So when we left, our youngest one was 14 months when we left for the mission field, and now here we are 10 years later. And I remember people thinking we were kind of nuts when we tell our family and friends, like, we've become missionaries when we go over to Africa, and they're like, what? Why? You have a baby, you have 3 children, and one of them has special needs. Why would you do that? But the calling was strong in our hearts, and we just felt the call to serve. And MAF worked with us to find the right fit with all things considered, and there's just no looking back.
And honestly, the very first time, more than 10 years ago now, when Matt came home with his information package on MAF and said, you know what, I think that we should move to Africa and become missionaries, even though I thought he was nuts. But in the beginning,
I remember that. Yeah.
It took some convincing, but God really laid the passion on my heart too. And
well, yeah, I remember that day. It's like, how do I present this to my wife? It's like, honey, how do you feel about becoming missionaries to Africa? And she said, why? So we can be missionaries right here. This is where. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's true. where you serve where you are, right? But I said, well, I think this particular calling is in a different country, in a different continent. So that took some convincing, but not much. I think you may remember the story of Chandra's got a long history of missionaries in her family. So that was already in her family and in her blood, I'd say. So it didn't take that much convincing to get her to agree to move over to the other side of the world. But we love the work at MAF. Like I'm really proud of the work we did over there, and I'm proud of the work that is still ongoing, and especially being able to see it firsthand. Right? I mean, there's a lot of people that come and tell you about the work that's being done in God's name, and once you see it for yourself, it just really just solidifies your belief. And it solidifies the work that our missionaries are doing around the world, and to be able to be part of that. I mean, flying on a day-to-day basis, I was flying missionaries, I was flying development workers, I was flying midwives, I was flying engineers and Habitat for Humanity every day, and seeing firsthand the work that's being done and the effect that it has in the communities, those really isolated communities, the cut-off communities for various reasons, that just solidified to me that this is really important work, and this is blessed by God for sure because of the impact. But I'll show a video just maybe a little bit of a reminder. I think there may be a couple of people here that are new to the congregation since I was last year, so I'm kind of preaching to the choir a little bit and then maybe introducing some new ideas to some folks. But yeah, if we can have one video and.
Come and help us. So now we are in light.
For over 75 years, MA has been overcoming the enormous barriers facing the most remote communities of the world. What started off as the dream of a couple of Christian Air Force pilots is now a global movement, with 138 aircraft flying in more than 28 countries and using more than 1,400 airstrips. That's more than any other airline in the world. And with each airstrip being used by multiple communities, we are able to reach hundreds of thousands of people. But the best news is, we're just getting started. We want to invite you to join us in this ministry. By partnering with MAF, you are also partnering with 2,000 organisations that depend on us to achieve their vision. Your help means that lives are saved, that community development is achieved, and that the gospel is delivered. So join with us today and bring real hope to remote communities across the world.
Paints a good picture, doesn't it? My favorite part is just, as a pilot, not just the aircraft, but seeing the airplanes land in those really, really remote spots on the edge of a mountain, and just realizing it's like the lengths that we Christians will go to spread the gospel. That's how far we're going to go, to the ends of the earth, to the tips of the mountaintops, with airplanes to be able to spread the gospel and to bring hope and help and healing to those communities. So that's the focus, the isolated. We're specifically using the tools of an airplane to reach isolated communities that are isolated because of geography. As you can see, those real isolated mountain communities, whether it's natural disasters that have cut people off, or if it's weather, civil war, that kind of stuff that cuts people off from basic necessities and having their basic needs met. And that's the gap we're filling. So one of my, I could stand up here and I could tell you story after story. Like I said, I flew every day, missionaries and aid workers and development workers. I'm going to stand here. I've got a Rolodex of 100 I could probably talk about, but my favorite is probably Every Village, South Sudan. So this was a missionary organization out of Texas that are operating in South Sudan. And there's a little snapshot of South Sudan to give you an idea of the barren, dry, with that one single road, and that one single road will run 800 kilometers, and that's in various states. I think that's pretty good condition right there until the rainy season comes. But because it's the only main road through the entire country, it's a bit of a hotbed for bandits and ambushes. So that's one of the biggest threats for people trying to travel around those places is the banditry and ambushes. Of course, there's a civil war that flares up and dies down every couple of months as well, and then just desperate people doing desperate things. So traveling is really, really, really dangerous in those countries. But so getting the gospel out was a tricky thing for missionaries trying to reach people. And what this missionary team thought is like, well, why don't we put up radio towers? So that's what they've done. Every village has gone and they've set up radio towers. So they've built the radio stations. And I think you can just see the little tower. Maybe it's a bit faint. The next picture might, yeah. So it's just a radio tower. So they're broadcasting. So they broadcast the gospel on these airwaves, as well as community service notices, health advisories. So they're getting the community involved to share, just community news as well as the gospel. And they can only broadcast about 4 hours in the morning and then 4 in the afternoon, because they use solar panels to recharge the batteries so they can broadcast. So they have the power to do the broadcast. But they partnered with a Canadian organization, because these missionaries realized not too long after they set up the radio stations, they realized, the majority of people don't have radios. And so they went out and started making connections with other mission organizations and found this one in Ontario that makes solar-powered little handheld radios. And not a smartphone. It's a little radio, and you can see a little black solar panel on the back, so they can just charge their radios that way. and or you can get the little hand crank radios. So then they distributed those amongst the community, and then they got curious to see, of course, missionaries wanting to know how many people are we reaching, right? So then they went and did little surveys. They'd go out into the community, and anytime they saw this little blue radio, they'd count how many people were standing around listening, intently listening to as that they're preaching that gospel message. And they say, like, for every one radio, there's usually an average of 5 people listening. And so they could do the math that way and realize that they're potentially reaching hundreds of thousands of people, 100,000 people or more in that region. So they've got now 3 radio stations set up around South Sudan, and their approach was they would go in and get to know people in the local community and find the local people with a real heart, and local pastors, even better if there was a local pastor, and be able to work. So fortunately, there was usually somebody that's got some pretty good English. So they would work closely with a local pastor, or they'd find a young person that has a real heart for God and just minister to him and walk alongside him and build him up as a pastor, as a preacher for that local community, right? Because that's a lot more powerful to have someone from your own community be able to speak to you about the gospel in your own language. So they built on that over the years, and they've been there 12 years or more. So we bring in the technicians, we fly in the technicians to service the solar panels and then replace the batteries when necessary. They have backup generators, but over in those really isolated places, you're paying anywhere from $15 to $20 a liter for gas to run a little generator. So they try to keep it to the solar stuff most of the time. But
they were able to fly in. Like the reason every village exists, you know, their goal is to see every village in South Sudan reached with the gospel. And as you saw from that first picture, it's not easy to get to every village in South Sudan to reach them with the gospel. And so by broadcasting and using radio to help share that message in the local language, they're reaching way more than they could on foot. And, you know, like Matt said, they're training people up. MAF continues to bring in the supplies for everything they need, from the broadcasting equipment, the microphones, the solar panels, the solar batteries, like
radios.
More radios. I think so far they're in their whole existence, they've now distributed 100,000 solar radios in South Sudan, and they're spoken for before they even hit the ground in the airplane. And so if you can do, well, I can do that math, it's easy, 100,000, 5 people listening to every radio, that's a lot of people hearing.
Actually reaching 500,000 people with a gospel message in these really isolated communities. So I did one of those flights myself and flew, was it 5,000 radios? It doesn't sound like much, but it filled up the plane, so I could only take so much. But regular flights to fly those radios to the community. So, I mean, that's just one example. It's one example of 100 that I could pull out to describe some of the work that we're doing. But like I said, having seen it firsthand, it just completely solidifies that this work is of God and that we are spreading the gospel. We're doing our part to spread the gospel, and we're helping local communities be able to do that. I mean, you see we have the little Flying for Life magazine. That's record. That's record of the gospel being shared and people's lives being changed in Jesus' name. We've got that imprinted record of that happening every day, as that Flying for Life magazine is filled with true stories of what's happening in these communities that are being impacted. Now that we're home, I've accepted a position and am now working with MAF as a recruiter. So when we came back, they were trying to find something for me to do. Couldn't find anything right away, so I worked for Forest Protection Limited for a little while, the water bombers here in the province. And then when MAF contacted me this summer, said, hey, we finally have a position all defined, and would you do some recruiting for us on the East Coast? So now I'm looking for missionaries. So been there myself, so we can speak from some experience. when we're recruiting pilots, aircraft maintenance, we're recruiting teachers, we're recruiting admin staff. There's full-time positions, there's volunteer positions. So if you have grandkids or nieces or nephews, friends of the family that you know are interested in overseas missions, or even more specifically in aviation, I'd love to speak to them. That's my new role, is to encourage young people or people that are just retired and they still have it in them to go overseas and serve. We actually have we have a couple of people that have done that. Were able to retire relatively early, and now they're missionaries in their 50s, went to the mission field for the first time. But yeah, I'd love to connect with anybody that you can think of that would be interested in overseas missions.
And for those of you who know Matt, the only thing he loves more, like as a hobby to do more than flying, is talking about flying. So it's a role that really suits him well, being able to talk to people. But as his wife, it's exciting for me to say, like, you know what? God isn't done using his skills yet. I have always firmly believed that we've all been given a set of skills to use for his glory. And, you know, if we're pilots or engineers or teachers or writers, you know, we're prayer warriors and we're supporters, and the list goes on and on and on. And none of those skills, whether they're used here or overseas or anywhere, go wasted if God has given them to us. And I think that it's just really exciting for Matt, and I've come along with them to a lot of places to talk. We spoke at the Kingswood University in Sussex to the class the other day, and it's just really exciting to see all of those young people getting excited about the different ways that they can go out and share the gospel. And so, you know, if MAF is what God has in store for people, you know, that's what we're still doing. And what Matt didn't say is that they've actually contacted him this week to go back over and serve for the summer back in Uganda and South Sudan, flying. So he's going to be back at it for a little bit. You know, I said it's really exciting because then he also gets to come back. It will help him talk to young people about getting involved in a career in missions if he's still involved and still passionate about it. So we're really excited about that, and still serving with MAF. I cannot believe it's been 10 years. The time has flown. I guess it's true when, you know, time flies when you're having fun, but it has been fun. It's been rocky at points. It's been an adventure. And so I think that, you know, following Jesus should always be an adventure. I know you guys have been praying for one of our pilots, Ryan, who's been imprisoned in Mozambique. I think I have oh yeah, there he is. He's been imprisoned in Mozambique. I've been sending Irma through a few updates that I get from our head office on how he's doing. He was imprisoned in Mozambique. He was getting ready to transport a load of supplies to an orphanage in the north of that country, where in the last couple of years there's been some terrorist activity, and all of a sudden the government became concerned that the orphanage that they were transporting goods to in the north of the country was supporting that terrorist activity. So he was out at his plane, unaware of what was going on inside, but the 2 volunteers that were coming through were detained at customs over some vitamins in the supply packs that were going up north to the orphanage. They've never said why exactly. They haven't given a cause for the arrest because they're not an illegal substance. But Ryan, because he was prepared to accept these onto the plane, was arrested in conjunction. So all 3 men are still in prison. We've been praying for him for the last few months, as I know you guys have too. He was finally able to talk to his wife for the first time a couple of weeks ago. They said they'd give him 10 minutes on the phone, and once he got connected through to Annabelle and the boys in the middle of the night, they let him talk for over an hour and a half, which was a huge blessing for the boys to be able to hear his voice and for Annabelle to talk to him. He's doing well. I'm always amazed how when he writes letters out and we get them, he doesn't lose heart. He's not discouraged. He's actually looking at all of the blessings and the ways he can share the gospel while he's in prison. And I think it just shows that God has really been with him through this entire thing. We were hoping this past week that he would be allowed out on bail while he awaits trial. The judge denied that, so they're going to continue to hold him. But I know that you guys have been praying, and this Wednesday, February 15th, MAF is holding a global day of prayer and fasting for Ryan and his family. I don't know if there's anyone here who would like to join us in that and pray for the Coer family, but on Wednesday, February 15th. So they will be praying for his family and praying for his release, and hopefully that God will work in the hearts of the judge and the people who are holding him, that something can be worked out, that he will be released until they can continue to prove his innocence in the whole thing.
They've actually, MAF has been able to, because we've got bases all around the world, through this is clever scheduling, but we're able to pray for 24 hours. So we're going to be praying for 24 hours, and just all around the world, people have just signed up to say, okay, I will pray from this hour to this hour. Somebody else in a different part of the world will say from this hour to this hour, and next thing you know, we've got 24-hour prayer happening for Ryan and the other two men, the other two volunteers that are also detained. So that's the power of prayer, right? It's just, we can't say enough about it. And we thank you guys. On that note, I want to thank you, our prayer warriors here, for all our years of service overseas and our service here back in Canada. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank this church community for the support and encouragement over the years. I know, Irma, it wasn't a hard sell for David and Irma when they heard we were with MAF. So I think that was just the foot in the door. But ever since then, I know you guys have been behind us and praying for us. So that's huge. We really appreciate it. I've got one more video I'd like to show that speaks to the legacy of MAF and the impact it has had on people's lives and those isolated communities, and just that commitment, that long-term commitment that MAF is to a lot of those communities, and building those relationships over years and years. strikes a chord, doesn't it? Just in closing, if you don't mind, I'd like to just read a bit of scripture here and read a devotional, and I think that'll be my time. I'd like to read to you from Hebrews 12, verse 18 to 29. You have not come to a mountain that can be touched and that is burning with fire, to darkness, gloom, and storm, to a trumpet blast, or to such a voice speaking words that those who heard it begged that no further word be spoken to them, because they could not bear what was commanded. If even an animal touches the mountain, it must be stoned. The sight was so terrifying that Moses said, I am trembling with fear. But you have come to Mount Zion, to the heavenly Jerusalem, the city of the living God. You have come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. You have come to God, the judge of all men, to the spirits of righteous men made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. See to it that you do not refuse him who speaks. If they did not escape when they refused him who wanted them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time this voice shook the earth, but now he has promised, once more I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. The words, once more, indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is, created things, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful, and so worship God, acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. So the author Jerry Bridges goes on to unpack this a bit, and he interprets this passage by saying that one of the more serious sins of Christians today may well be the almost flippant familiarity with which we often address God in prayer. None of the godly men of the Bible ever adopted the casual manner we often do. They always addressed God with reverence. The same writer who tells us that we have confidence to enter the most holy place, the throne room of God, also tells us that we should worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. The same Paul who tells us that the Holy Spirit dwelling within us causes us to cry, Abba, Father, also tells us that this same God lives in unapproachable light. In our day, we must begin to recover a sense of awe and profound reverence for God. We must begin to view him once again in the infinite majesty that alone belongs to him who is the creator and supreme ruler of the entire universe. There is an infinite gap in worth and dignity between God, the creator, and man, the creature, even though man has been created in the image of God. The fear of God is a heartfelt recognition of this gap, not a put down of man, but an exaltation of God. We seem to have magnified the love of God almost to the exclusion of the fear of God. Because of this preoccupation, we are now honoring God and reverencing him as we should. We should magnify the love of God, but although we revel in his love and mercy, we must never lose sight of his majesty and his holiness. Again, I want to thank you folks. Thank you so much for this time and being able to share with you, and to thank you after all the years, to thank you for your prayer and support of our ministry with MAF. Thank you.